I would like to comment on something a caller said last week, and this was reported on Press TV. Prominent journalist Seymour Hersh exposes details of a plan considered by U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney on how to provoke war with Iran. And two, if you called during our interviews, we had some phone calls while we were playing our interviews. Feel free to call back. There was a dozen ideas proffered about how to trigger a war with Iran, Hersh said recently in a reference to the subject of a discussion at a meeting held at Cheney's office. In a July article published in The New Yorker, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist revealed information about a covert U.S. operation carried out in Iran. He did not disclose the contents of the talks with Cheney in his article, but in a recent interview with Think Progress, however, Hersh exposes that the meeting witnessed Cheney mulling over a proposal to dress up Navy SEALs as Iranians and shoot them in order to trigger a war with Iran. The one plan that interested me the most was why don't we, in our shipyard, build 4 or 5 boats that look like Iranian PT boats, put Navy SEALs on them with a lot of arms, and next time one of our boats in the Strait of Hormuz start to shoot them up, he revealed in his recent interview. Now, this has been reported by Seymour Hersh, a respected journalist. This story was on MSNBC and probably the real news, and that's about all. But it was in the news, and it went widely unreported, and we had a phone caller last week that knew about it. Here we're reporting that our vice president in the news discussing a false flag event to start a war with Iran. People, please wake up and look into this for yourselves. Start thinking for yourselves. The true reality is out there. Stop believing the corporate-owned mainstream media's propaganda machine of disinformation. I'd like to give Brian a chance to update what Miguel Gorbachev has said in relations to the war that's broke out between Russia and Georgia.
Earlier this week, former Russian President Mikhail Gorbachev gave a good summary on the events in Georgia. This is from Monday's Washington Post, and I quote, "For some time, relative calm was maintained in South Ossetia. The peacekeeping force composed of Russians, Georgians, and Ossetians fulfilled its mission, and ordinary Ossetians and Georgians who lived close to each other found at least some common ground. What happened on the night of August 7th is beyond comprehension. The Georgian military attacked the South Ossetian capital with multiple rocket launchers designed to devastate large areas. Mounting a military assault against innocents was a reckless decision whose tragic consequences for thousands of people of different nationalities are now clear. The Georgian leadership could do this only with the perceived support and encouragement of a much more powerful force. Georgian armed forces were trained by hundreds of U.S. instructors, and its sophisticated military equipment was brought in by a number of countries. This, coupled with a promise of NATO membership, emboldened Georgian leaders into thinking that they could get away with a blitzkrieg in South Ossetia. Russia had to respond. To accuse it of aggression against a small, defenseless Georgia is not only hypocritical, but shows a lack of humanity." End quote. And the question here, first of all, is whether or not Americans would trust Mikhail Gorbachev more than the corporate-owned media, which we've all been hearing the opposite of this. And, of course, in this situation, my gut reaction is to trust Mikhail Gorbachev.
Well, that's the story we're going to be updating because the conflict that's happening right now in Georgia has some very serious ramifications if it continues, and I don't believe the world's going to heed the big United States to come in and be the policeman on this one again. Since we're doing 9/11, I'd like to also update a story. Ed Asner wants ballot referendum for new 9/11 probe. Actor Ed Asner, former Dallas Cowboy Mark Stepnoski, and former famous hip-hop group Arrested Development are leading a petition drive to get a referendum on New York City's November ballot that would establish a new 9/11 investigation. If the group called 9/11 Truth can collect 30,000 signatures before September 4th, City Council will be required to consider the measure, which calls for an investigative panel with subpoena authority. Former Senator Mike Gravel, who would join the panel along with former Senator Lincoln Chafee, Asner, and the 9/11 widow Lori Van Aken, tells New York Mag that the original commission did not get to the bottom of anything. We need to investigate from scratch. Among the top 40 reasons that the group doubts the official story of 9/11, and this is from their website, the long-standing relationship between U.S. intelligence networks and radical Islamists. Flight 93, did the Shanksville crash occur at 10:06 according to the seismic reports, or 10:03 according to the 9/11 Commission? Does the Commission wish to hide what happened in the last 3 minutes of the flight? If so, why? And where was the wreckage? The Pentagon strike. How is it possible the Pentagon was hit 1 hour and 20 minutes after the attacks began? Why was there no response from Andrews Air Force Base just 10 miles away? Amen. So we will always update this story of the 9/11 truth movement that goes completely unreported by the corporate-owned puppet media. Also, we've been covering the anthrax case in detail, and I really thought this would have fell out of the news. It's fell out of the mainstream news. But a federal investigator probing the deadly 2001 attacks this week, Thursday, August 14th, recovered samples of human hair from a mailbox in Princeton, New Jersey, but the strands did not match the lead suspect in the case, according to sources briefed on the probe. FBI agents and U.S. Postal Service inspectors analyzed the data in an effort to place Fort Detrick's Maryland scientist Bruce Ivins at the mailbox from which bacteria-laden letters were sent to Senate offices and media organizations, the sources said. Their hair sample is one of many pieces of evidence over which researchers continue to puzzle in the case, which ended after Ivins committed suicide July 29th as prosecutors prepared to seek his indictment. Authorities released sworn statements and search warrants last week at a news conference in which they asserted that Ivins was their sole suspect. But the materials have not dampened speculation about the merits of this investigation, findings in the government's aggressive pursuit of Ivins, a 62-year-old anthrax vaccine researcher. Yesterday, the Senate Judiciary Committee announced it will call FBI Director Robert Mueller to appear at the oversight hearing September 17th, which he is likely to be asked about the strength of the government's case against Ivins. A spokeswoman for Senator Charles Grassley, a local FBI critic, said he would demand more information on how authorities narrowed their search. The House Judiciary Panel, meanwhile, is negotiating to hold separate oversight hearings in September with Bureau officials in a session that could mark the first public occasion in which Mueller faces questions about the FBI's handling of the anthrax case. Friends and former colleagues of Ivins, who died before he could see the full array of evidence prosecutors had gathered, continued to demand information about the DNA advances that authorities say led them to a flask in Ivins' lab. Defense lawyer Paul Kemp yesterday said he wonders where Ivins could have possibly stored this anthrax without any employees seeing it, or if he took it home, why there was no trace of the deadly spores despite repeated FBI searches over the past 2 years of Ivins' car, his locker, safe deposit box, and his house. As I said last week, this case just keeps getting stranger by the day, and we will continue to update this case. If you'd like to call in, 704-873-1400. Our Davie County number is 336-499-0681. I'd like to hear what you got to say before we go off the air.